the silence before the crowd. Maria stood in front of the mirror, her reflection barely visible in the pale morning light. The apartment was silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock and the gentle breathing of her 2 children still asleep on the couch. She tied her hair into a low bun, slipped on her worn tennis shoes, and picked up the hand-painted sign leaning against the kitchen wall. "I clean your homes. Who cleans my rights?" The paint was still faintly sticky. It was May 1st, International Workers' Day, but to Maria, it felt more personal. This wasn't about politics or headlines. This was about Rosa, her co-worker who was fired for taking a sick day. This was about working 10-hour shifts without breaks. This was about fear, the kind that gripped you when the boss reminded you that papers matter more than people. She reached into her coat pocket and touched a photo of her children, folded soft from years of handling. Their faces, frozen in a moment of joy at the park, gave her the courage she needed. She didn't want them to inherit this silence, the kind of quiet that lives in people who are overworked and unseen. As she locked the door behind her, a neighbor peeked through a cracked window, but said nothing. Everyone knew about the protest, but not everyone had the strength to join. On the bus ride to downtown Los Angeles, the city passed by her in fragments. Sleeping tents on the freeways, billboards promising luxury, fast food workers heading home as janitors clocked in. Maria sat near the back, sign resting across her knees. A man in a reflective vest gave her a nod. Another woman held a poster in Spanish. "Somos el pulso del país." We are the pulse of the nation. By the time she stepped off near Pershing Square, a small crowd had gathered. The air was thick with anticipation. Volunteers handed out bottled water and pamphlets. Maria kept to herself, eyes scanning the crowd. Nurses, teachers, delivery drivers, cooks. She felt a strange unity in their shared exhaustion. A young organizer climbed a makeshift platform and tapped the mic. "Before we march," he said, voice firm but gentle, "remember, we are here to be heard, not feared. Stay calm. Stay together." Maria took a breath. She looked down at her shoes, cracked at the sides, then back at the sky. For the first time in a long time, she felt taller than her fears. Then the chanting began, low and steady, rising like a heartbeat. She gripped her sign tighter and stepped forward with the crowd, her voice joining the swell. She didn't know what the day would bring, but for the first time, she wasn't walking alone. A boy named Kian. Kian stood at the edge of the street, clutching a worn cardboard sign that read, "My father died building this city." His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from a storm inside him. It had been months since his father's funeral, but Kian's grief was still raw, the edges of it jagged and sharp. The words on his sign were his way of making the world feel his loss. His father had been a construction worker, the kind who built skyscrapers but never got to live in them. He had died in an accident no one had taken responsibility for. And now Kian was here on the streets of Chicago to demand what his father never got, justice. He wasn't supposed to be here. High school graduation was just weeks away. His mom had begged him not to go, saying, "You've worked so hard. You can change things with your future, not with a protest." But Kian knew the truth. Change didn't come with a diploma. Change came with loud voices, with the kind of protest his father would have supported if he were alive. His father's hands had built this city, but Kian's voice would tear down the walls of silence. The march was already gathering in Grant Park, a sea of faces that blurred into one. The oppressed, the forgotten, the workers who kept the wheels of the city turning. Kian's breath caught as he saw the crowd swell. He was nervous, unsure what to expect. His friends had warned him about protests like these. They were dangerous, unpredictable. But Kian wasn't afraid of the chaos. He was afraid of staying silent. As he moved into the crowd, the chants began, growing louder with every step. His heart beat faster, matching the rhythm of the march. "Justice for workers," someone yelled. "No justice, no peace." The words surged around him, powerful, demanding. Kian felt the heat of the moment, the unity that stretched across the streets. He glanced around, searching for familiar faces, but finding none. Instead, he locked eyes with a woman who was walking beside him. She looked tired, Her shoulders slumped under the weight of years spent cleaning homes, but there was something fierce in her gaze. Kian recognized the sign she carried. "I clean your homes. Who cleans my rights?" Her presence gave him a jolt, a reminder that this wasn't just about his father. This was about all the workers who were exploited, the ones who were invisible until they were needed. Kian's voice caught his throat as the crowd surged forward, but the woman smiled at him, her eyes sparkling with the unspoken understanding of shared struggle. The march reached the steps of City Hall, and Kian felt a wave of emotion, anger, grief, but also something else. Hope. A realization that perhaps this was the start of something bigger than protest. Maybe, just maybe, it could be the start of real change. Kian held his sign high and stepped into the crowd. This wasn't just for his father anymore. It was for everyone who had been forgotten. Tear gas in the afternoon. The air in downtown Washington, D.C., was thick with anticipation. Maria and Kian's paths had not yet crossed, but the chaos unfolding felt like something bigger than their separate stories. The crowd had grown into a mass of people from every corner of the country. Fast food workers, teachers, truck drivers, and immigrants all gathered to demand their rights. The sun beat down harshly, and Maria wiped the sweat from her brow, feeling the heat of the moment in every breath she took. By the time she reached the front of the rally near the Capitol, the chants had begun. Workers' rights. Human rights. The sound was deafening, a wave of voices crashing against the stone buildings. She felt the ground beneath her vibrate with every step the crowd took. For a moment, it was as if the world had paused, and all that mattered was the unity of these voices. Her voice. But that quiet moment was fleeting. In the distance, the flash of blue and red lights sparked. The police line moved in, a wall of riot gear and shields. Maria's heart skipped a beat. She had heard rumors about what could happen today. Arrests, violence, tear gas. But she had never been in a protest this large before. She wasn't prepared for the growing tension in the air, the looming threat of something more dangerous. Kian was closer to the stage, his eyes wide as the mood shifted. He had never felt anything like this. The energy was electric, but beneath it was an undercurrent of fear. When the first bottle flew through the air, he flinched. It hit the pavement with a sharp crack, and before anyone could react, the riot police began moving forward. A woman beside him shouted, "Stay calm." But it was too late. The first canisters of tear gas hissed and exploded on the ground, releasing a pungent cloud of smoke that filled the streets. Kian's eyes burned, his throat tightening with every breath. People screamed and ran, their voices choked by the chemicals in the air. The crowd splintered in panic, but some of them, including Kian, stayed rooted to the ground. Maria had already begun to move when she saw the cloud of gas. Her breath caught as the world around her blurred. The protesters ahead of her staggered, coughing and gasping for air, but she pushed forward, her legs carrying her despite the sting in her eyes. She couldn't stop now. This wasn't just about her. It was about every worker who had ever been silenced. She had to make sure their voices were heard. Through the haze, Kian saw Maria stumbling. Her sign was twisted in her hands, but she kept going. Without thinking, he ran to her, his chest burning from the gas. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the side of the street. She coughed, tears streaming down her face, but her eyes were steady, determined. "What are we doing?" Kian gasped, trying to catch his breath. Maria, breathless but resolute, looked at him and simply said, "We keep fighting. After the smoke clears." The sky was quiet now, save for the distant whir of helicopters above. The streets of Washington, D.C. were littered with remnants of the day. Discarded signs, broken bottles, and a faint, acrid scent of tear gas still hanging in the air. The chaos had settled, but the heavy silence that followed felt more profound than any of the protests had been. Maria and Kian had fled the cloud of smoke, taking refuge in an alley where the city's harsh reality seemed a world away. They sat against the cold stone wall, their breaths still shallow, the ringing in their ears gradually fading. Kian looked at Maria, her face streaked with dirt and tears, her eyes still fixed ahead, distant but resolute. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Maria nodded, but her gaze remained unfocused. She was still processing everything, the gas, the chaos, the fear. But underneath it all was something stronger. She had come here not just to demand justice, but to reclaim something that had long been stolen from her. Her voice. Even now, with the echoes of the day still ringing in her ears, she felt it. The protest had been more than a march. It had been a declaration that she was here, that she mattered. "I'm fine," she said softly, but the words carried weight. She wasn't just fine, she was changed. Kian shifted, pulling out his phone to check for updates. He had already seen the footage on social media. Images of protesters kneeling in solidarity, others marching with their fists raised high. His father's name, too, was being shared. It was there, in the comments, beneath the viral videos. Rest in power. Kian's father will never be forgotten. Kian felt a knot in his stomach. He had come here with one mission, to honor his father, to make sure his sacrifice wasn't lost. But now, sitting in the aftermath, he realized something deeper. The protest was not just about him or his father. It was about all the workers, all the forgotten voices who had been ignored for far too long. As he stood, Maria followed him. They walked out of the alley, side by side, as the crowd slowly began to disperse. The streets were quieter now, the police lines retreating, leaving only the lingering shadow of their presence. But for the first time that day, Kian felt hope. The work wasn't done. The fight was far from over. But something had shifted. Back home, Maria stood in the doorway of her apartment, watching her children sleep. They were safe, unaware of the day's chaos. But she had carried their future with her on that march, for their right to be seen, to be heard, she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "Next year, I'll march again." And as the evening settled in, Kian stood before the mirror, staring at his reflection. The march had ended, but his journey had just begun. He wasn't just fighting for his father anymore. He was fighting for all of them, for every worker who had ever been ignored, forgotten, silenced. And next year, he would march again.